and it's a small thing, but I consider it important. I always ask if there's one more thing. Is there one thing that you want to tell me that nobody asked you? Especially in the ED, right, where everything is quick and people are afraid and they're like, oh, what's going on? I have no idea, right? And especially if you educate and they're out and they remember like one of the 10 things you tell them and stuff, right? And I really learned. I always ask, is there one more thing? And 90 times is nothing, right? But the one time you will hear something that nobody asked, that the doctors didn't catch, that the family didn't catch, and they will tell you. If you listen, patients will tell you what's going on with them.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. This is where we share stories for inspiration, entertainment, and encouragement, because we all know emergency nurses have the best stories. Now here's your host, Kevin McFarland.
Hello, everyone. Kevin McFarland here from the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast, and thank you for tuning in once again. If you find this podcast interesting, fun, or helpful, please leave us a rating and review in your podcast player of choice. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more nurses like you. Don't forget to share this podcast with your colleagues, your friends, people you like, people you don't like. Share it with everybody. We appreciate your support of the podcast. Today is an extra special episode because I had a dear friend and former colleague join me today. Torsten, my guest today, has worked as an ICU nurse, an ER nurse, a flight nurse, and is currently serving as the stroke program coordinator for a level 1 trauma center, which will soon be a comprehensive stroke center. Torsten has incredible stories to share, and I'm excited that you get to hear them. It was such a great experience to reminisce about my old stomping grounds and the people we worked with. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode with my friend Torsten.
Okay, very good. My name is Torsten Rohde. I am a nurse. I'm not from this country originally. I came from Germany and lived in Los Angeles for a while and did some wild stuff out there. It's a long time ago, 80s and 90s. We don't talk about those things, except the good part, the one I remember. My background's really business, sales. I have this funny little accent sometimes, and so I sold German cars for many years. Then decided in my 40s that this is not enough for me anymore. I want to have a career. I want to do something that makes a difference. Not just in sales, your difference is the paycheck, right? Your commission. And I wanted to do something different. And I ended up through a neighbor that I ran into, told me that she became a nurse in her late 40s. It's like, oh, okay, that actually sounds good. So I decided to become a nurse. I went to Santa Fe Community College and got my ADN there. And that was in 2007. I graduated in 2010. So they say it's a 2-year program, but prereqs and stuff. I didn't have any college stuff before. Like I said earlier, I was 45. My 45th birthday was on my first day of nursing school. So
nice.
I started in Santa Fe at Christus. I started on the ortho floor. I was actually CNA while I was in nursing school, so I already worked the floor. I worked ortho, and then I got into the ICU there, the regular ICU. We had some issues at the time when Christus took over St. Vincent, and we had some issues with union stuff. And I got headhunted basically by an old friend of mine that said, come over to UNM. And I started in NSI, and it was in 2011. And I did it for 4 years. And then like some people who came from NSI down to the ED and wanted to see where the rubber meets the road, right? And I only stayed a little over 2 years, I think 2.5 years in ED. And that's because then I got a job in flight. I worked for UNMH lifeguard. And so I still had plenty to do in the ED, but I was out on airplanes and helicopters at the state of New Mexico. And that really opened my eyes a little bit. What's going on in New Mexico, right? I can honestly say that I've been to every clinic, every hospital, every little podunk, whatever here in the state, right? Eventually. So,
I'm sure that's
some
true.
of them are very good, and some of them,
I'm sure that's true.
And some of them are struggling, right?
There's certainly some places that have opportunity for improvement, right? Like there's some places that you think to yourself, wow, how do they do what they do? And it's amazing the work that they do. But it's, they sometimes struggle a little bit.
With the resources, of course, there's a lot of, New Mexico is one of those states where if you work here outside the big cities, you can get your student loans forgiven, right? And so there is definitely that program. There's some good providers out there and some good nurses. But yeah, we've seen definitely some interesting things. We can get into that maybe later. And then I decided about 3 years ago, I was asked to come into administration, and I took over the stroke program with a distinct goal to become a comprehensive stroke center, the first and only one at the time here in New Mexico. And we did that. And we did it for 3 years. Unfortunately, this year, end of last year, we actually lost the comprehensive certification because we couldn't keep 24-hour coverage with providers.
Yeah,
so
that's hard.
We had to give that up. We primary center again. But now we're working on it again. So we have people again. So there's another push. We know all our processes are still there, right? It was really just a coverage. So, and we're working back into that. So then recently when that happened, I decided I got then again asked to go somewhere else, and ended up with quality management.
Nice.
And that's what I'm doing right now. However, and this is kind of the serious part of this conversation, right? As you know, we just lost somebody very dear and close to us from the UNMHED.
Yep.
And I don't know if it's okay to name names or not, but a person that was very special to all of us. I worked with her in NSI before she went to the ED. She went to the ED a little after me, but then became a charge nurse and ultimately the director. And she was a sponsor and support for a mentor for many, many people over the only few years that she did this. And just the last weekend, and it's reeling, right? You can
it's just heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking to see everybody there struggling the way they are. And
so my take on this is, we were so overrun. We are still so overrun at UNMH. We almost got used to it that we can't really provide optimal care to everybody at all times, right? We have to start to use our resources and there was no other way. It's different if you start losing your own. That hits home, and you can feel that. That really hit home.
100%.
And so very sad. But I mean, unfortunately, as we all know in this business, life does go on. And fortunately, maybe. So that's kind of my background. So I'm a second career nurse. I'm very happy I chose this career. Very challenging. I started flying in my 50s. So it was interesting.
That's cool.
I enjoyed it very much. But I also have to say, yeah.
So why did you choose? Why did you choose nursing? Was it just like, well, okay, that's fine, nursing will work?
I consider myself one of those wounded healers, right? Last month I celebrated 20 years clean and sober. So I was out there doing stupid stuff, right, for many, many years. And there came a point where I decided in my sobriety already a few years in, that I can't do anything anymore that's just for me. You know what I mean? Like jobs or, I can't be just selfish anymore. I still ride motorcycles and stuff, so I do things that are fun. But nothing, I cannot do jobs where I don't know, where I just consider my own, gratification in it. And nursing, like I said, I ran actually into a neighbor that was in Louisville, Colorado, outside Boulder, where I was working at the time. And she told me, and I was like, nursing, that sounds interesting. So I checked into it. I did my placement test at what was before it was CNM. What was it called?
TVI.
TVI, exactly.
That's where I graduated from nursing.
There you go. I did my placement test. And here's the thing, because I was kind of, I had a kind of a rough younger life. I didn't have a high school diploma, right? Uh-huh. And so they asked me for it, my high school diploma, and I said, I'm so sorry. My school burned down during the war. And she was like, so sorry. And I was like, and then I felt bad because, the war where I come from was long gone, right? And so I didn't correct her. And so, but I did do my placement test and ultimately was able to get a kind of a equivalent of a high school diploma. And I have now, of course, have my MSN now and patient safety and quality. So I got my ADN in 2010. I got my BSN in 2017 and my MSN last year. So I know once your question going to be later what you should do. And I tell her, do it faster. Don't wait as long as I did. It doesn't get any easier.
I took the long route too. I did my ADN, then I did my BSN, then I did my MSN, and I don't regret it in a lot of ways because it opened up a lot of doors and did a lot of cool stuff. But it was a long journey. So
that was a long journey. Yeah.
The long journey. It's a long journey to get that master's degree. So, but that's cool.
Yes,
that's cool.
Yes.
And did you all always know what kind of nurse you wanted to be?
No. So what happened is because I became the nurse out of these specific reasons, right? That I wanted to do something different. Then my next thing was, what can I handle? So anything that I can't handle. And not so much as a show-off piece, but I really meant it, right? I really wanted to know, how does it look when I deal with a dead person, right? And or with a grieving family, and so I did ICU first. I kind of slid into that NSI specifically, neuroscience, where you deal with strokes, where you deal with bleeds, aneurysms, but you also deal with spinal injuries and you deal with gunshot wounds, right? Quite a few actually. As you know, in the ED, of course, I get usually the ones in NSI, the ones that took their face off, that didn't kill themselves, and or other things, and then of course, interesting enough, the one that are very challenging are the quads, right? The quadriplegics, young people usually ATV accidents, horse riding accidents, motorcycles, whatever, and it's really something to be there with a young person once they realize that their life just completely changed, right?
I can't even imagine. And, oftentimes in the ER, we get to skip that piece. That's not something we're usually a whole lot involved in. But those conversations are going to be had, those, realizations are going to happen, hours later in the ICU. And it's just heartbreaking.
With the family, the moms and the wives, and it's really something, right? And so then the next thing, then I did this, like I said, for almost 4 years, and I really liked it. But then I wanted to say, can I handle them when they come in, right? When they really raw off the street. So I decided to go down to ED. And I don't know if you remember at the time, it wasn't that easy to get into trauma, right? No. You had to work with cubes for quite a while. We were well staffed at the time, and the old trauma nurses, they just wouldn't give up their spots.
Yeah, no, it's true. I remember, and it was worse before you got there. I mean, I remember, long time before that when it was like, you gotta be there a long time before they let you cross that threshold into the trauma rooms.
Yep. In the trauma room, I call it now. And of course, where they like to stick me as a guy was mech, right?
Oh, yeah.
We do have our mech stories for sure.
Yep.
So for your listeners, it means what metabolic encephalopathy, what does it mean? Encephalopathic care or something?
Yep, that's exactly, you nailed it. You got it exactly. And mech was for those who are listening who are like, I don't know what you're talking about. For those who are listening, that was essentially the drunk tank of the hospital. It was the intoxicated, the impaired, and oftentimes it was a locked unit, and oftentimes it was the more violent, more potentially, problematic patients. And boy, a lot of crazy stories I have from that area, as you do, I'm sure.
It was, and I mean, that was the old days. It changed it now. At the time when we were there, they didn't have a security officer at all times, right? That came later.
Nope, I think that came just before I left, but I think I was almost out. I think I was PRN at the time, but
yeah, okay, yes.
But
and then they had, if you remember, our desk was actually L-shaped against the wall, so you could actually get caught.
Yeah, it wasn't the best design. You could get cornered. No. You can get cornered, and many people did get cornered into that corner of that desk. And you're in a locked unit with potentially violent patients, and we had panic alarms and stuff that if we needed to hit it, we can get help. But it was, it was going to take a minute for security to get there.
Yeah, eventually got smarter, and they opened up that desk, and they at least could kind of run around, staying away.
Yep.
And then also for a while, quite successfully, they had a security officer at all times.
Yeah.
Which did help, right? But of course, stuff still happened. And then what happened, what was it, 10 beds or something? And when one started to go crazy, they all went go crazy.
Yeah, no, it was, let's see, it was 4 beds. When I was there, it was 4 beds and usually 2 to 3 hall patients.
Oh, okay.
And because the 2 offices were in there, my office and the other office were in there. So that took up the 2 rooms there. My office was there. So when I was in the office, I would be like, I'd always end up getting involved in those exciting cases.
They like to put the guys in there. Yeah, the best tech I ever had there was before she left, pretty much after I started. But you must remember her. She had also a wrought iron business. She made gates and things like that, and T-shirts. She was a strong girl, and she helped me a lot. I learned in Mecca. I learned things like do not ever turn your back on anybody. And make sure when there's a female in the room, make sure you have somebody with you. You're going to get accused of all kind of crazy stuff.
I remember one day we had this patient there, and she was intoxicated, and we were restraining her, and I had my hand on her shoulder, and she was getting restrained. There's multiple hands on her. We were putting her in 4-point restraints. And I remember her saying, well, you just grabbed my boob. And I'm like, I clearly did not. But,
no, really?
But yeah, I was like, so, and everyone, I was a charge nurse that day. And I remember telling everybody, I'm like, okay, we're going to call security. We're going to have them do an investigation. We're going to do the whole 9 yards, right? We're like, we're going to act like we don't know if this happened or not. And we had security investigate it, everyone wrote statements, and everyone's like, why are you doing all this? I was like, I just don't want it to come up again. And, I'm like, this is a CYA thing. And then hours and hours later, the behavioral health nurse came in and was evaluating the patient. And the patient said, oh, during my, when they were restraining me, one of the nurses grabbed my boob. And so the behavioral health nurse came to me and said, oh my gosh, we have a problem. This happened. And I was like, oh, time out. Hold on. That was me. That was me that she said did that. I go, there were plenty of witnesses that said I didn't. And I got statements from everybody saying like, this has already been investigated. This has already been cleared. This is not a thing. But had that come up a day later, 2 days later, and we'd not done that due diligence, God knows what a hassle that could have been.
I learned that too, especially when because in MEC, everybody is stripped down, right? And rightfully so. We found all kind of shifts and drugs and in like the weirdest places, right? We had to do this. And I really learned early on to use a preferably female chaperone that came in there with me, and so to prevent those kinds of accusations, because it did happen,
it sure did.
It was very smart of you to do that.
Lots of memories and lots of stories. Boy, if I just told all the stories I have from MEC alone, holy cow!
Just from MEC alone, dude. I still, we talked about it. That's how we actually started this discussion, right? And how you ended up inviting me about violence and about reactions, right? And I don't want to say that we ever had texts that kind of, I don't want to say provoked anything. It's like kind of, but we were definitely in a situation. If you get punched in the face, you get angry, right? I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, you get spit on and bit and kicked. And I mean, we've all been there, right? This is a reality of our job. And I'm still very, I'm not very happy, especially with our, internal police force that didn't do anything about it, right? Yeah. I remember I got kicked in the kidneys once so hard that I basically was peeing blood for 3 days.
Wow. And, I had no idea. Holy cow.
Yeah. And I called, our police, and they said, we're not going to, nothing going to happen. We're not going to do it. Yeah. And I was like, well, at least a note. We do it now, actually, that we have a note when we check in a patient that it does give us an alarm that this patient has a violent history.
So you guys flag the charts now. Yes. For people with a history of violence. That's great, because we would see the same people come in
over and over.
Over. They would get violent over and over. I mean, there was a handful of names that I still to this day remember and go, I'll never forget. We have one guy who was big dude. He was like 6'6" and probably weighed like 300 pounds. And he would come in all the time and he'd be intoxicated. And one time he kind of flipped out and we had to take him down and everything else. It was this big deal. And a family member happened to work there and happened to see all this going down. And we're like going, oh, geez, I'm really sorry you had to see all this. And of course, once it all went down, then he was fine. He, got it out of his system. He was done. So,
52 and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. He got medicated. He got medicated. I think he went to behavioral health like right after that. He ended up, because he was essentially medically cleared. But I'll never forget, like, I don't know, maybe a week later, I ran into that guy at a restaurant. Right.
Oh.
And I that's what I said. I was like, oh, holy cow, this is so-and-so. And I had my nephew with me, and I'll never forget, I had my nephew with me, and I kind of caught my eye, and we kind of locked eyes, and I was like, oh shit. And he goes, oh, hey, Kevin, how you doing, buddy? How's it going? And I was like, hi, how you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm good, man. I'm doing so much better these days. And he was with his girlfriend, and he's like, this is my girlfriend. He introduces me to his girlfriend. And I was like, what is happening here? And he's like, oh, I'm doing really good. And it's good to see you and this and that. And then he introduced me to his girlfriend as, oh, this is Kevin. He works with my dad. And I was like, true story. True story. But I just remember going, holy cow, this is awkward. And that happened a few times that I ran into people outside of work that we took care of. It's a small community. That's going to happen. Yes. But boy, like I thought I was going to be in trouble because I was like, man, like me and this guy one-on-one, I'm going to get squashed. And I'm not a small dude, but he was going to squash me.
Yeah, we had the guy, I forgot the tech that saved our day. He's now, I think he's becoming a PA now. You know him, but I'm bad with names. Like I said, I lived through the 80s, right? And I remember some of it. So my name memory is somewhat limited. Anyway, we had this guy coming with a machete, right? He walked in after the fireman. So that's when we started to lock all our doors to the ED. Remember, they were always open. Yep. And I had actually, his girlfriend was a meth patient and crazy, and he was in Mac. And I heard this commotion, and I look out, and there's this guy with a machete yelling, "Where's my girlfriend? Where's my girlfriend?" And the tech, and now I don't remember his name. I'm on Facebook. I don't have time to look him up. He's like, "Hey, buddy, I'm going to help you look for your girlfriend and stuff." And he was like, "Oh, yeah, I'll be on your side." And then as soon as he let down, he just jumped him. We all just jumped on top of him. And funny stories, but that could have been going sideways really quick.
There's many a times that I was just thankful that nobody got hurt. Like I remember, we had a guy came in, and he was, he was kind of playing possum. He was, just kind of acting like he was sleeping. Then all of a sudden he gets up, darts off the ambulance bay, or darts off the ambulance gurney, and runs across the nurse's station. And he ran into the corner where Mech was. And of course that was all locked doors. And he ran into the door and slammed the door hard. And then came back, and I was in Mech at the time, and I remember coming out, and he had his back to me, but he had he was facing everybody else. And I just drilled him. I just football tackled him and tackled him to the ground. And everyone was like, holy crap, what just happened? I tackled this guy and got him down. And then of course we got him, restrained and everything else. But they were like, it looked like a football tackle. And I was like, well, I had to do something.
Do something.
And security was like, oh, you got to see the video. You got to see the video. And I'm like, just get rid of the video. Get rid of the video.
Yeah, really. I mean, that's how a discussion started with this fireman that kept punching this patient, right? And that's, of course, we all understand the sentiment, but we also know that that's wrong, right? I mean, my scariest thing in Mac was actually, yelling and screaming and the blood squirting when they roll the IVs out and stuff. But I got a guy, he was also kind of a possum, kind of quiet. He came with fire, and they said, okay, police had him. We went through his stuff. Fire had him. We went through his stuff and said, everything's clear. Everything's checked. He's fine. So we stripped him down. Everything was fine. Then I went through his bag, a fully loaded 9mm with 2 complete magazines. I mean, that's 17 shot each or something. Yeah. He could have taken us all out. He was quiet. He was calm. He wasn't doing anything stupid. But police and fire told me they went through his stuff. And it's like, no, you did. Because,
that's why I used to always tell the nurses, trust but verify. I mean, you could say, great, okay, thanks. But I remember coming in and one time finding a person who was in 4-point restraints, and he still had his pants on. And in those pants was a big old corkscrew. He had a big old corkscrew that was like,
yeah. You can hurt somebody. Yeah.
And I remember I was a supervisor at the time, and I remember being just angry and like being kind of a jerk. And I was kind of like, I went out and like scolded the staff and yelled and screamed and was kind of a jerk about it. But it was all out of fear, because I was sitting there thinking to myself, he could have killed somebody.
Yeah. I found shifts and belts. Yeah.
I mean, it's, there's so many things that patients can hurt themselves and us with. That sometimes it's kind of scary. So.
No, at the end, they were all naked, dude. I don't care. They got the thing on, but I at least checked it out, everything, so, but you're right. It's fear, right? I mean, you really, don't want to get caught with somebody that angry, that gone. And so we had the situation when people like this, when you get kicked or something, and I think, remember Jenny Mick got like hammered. She got like, had a black eye for days and stuff. She got like, I saw a bit about the name here, but we all been there, right? And I talked to the police, blah, 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 going to get low. And my problem is, I don't think you're responsible once you're completely drunk or completely high. I think your responsibility starts when you take that first beer, that first drink. That's when you're responsible. And once you're climbing up the wall and spitting and stuff, okay, by that time, I understand you're not in control anymore. So, but it's I think we're pretty much the only job, because the cop was like, oh, yeah, I'll be dealing with every time. I said, you have a taser, you have a gun,
they're not giving me a taser.
Them. I have to go in, right?
Yeah,
I have to touch this patient.
I got to get up there and get it up close and personal, and I don't get to carry a taser.
Exactly.
I think it's a great idea. Nurses with tasers, I think it's a great idea.
I don't know, man. Some of the nurses.
Okay, you got me there. So some of the nurses, maybe not a great idea, but it's it sometimes gets working in the ER is kind of dangerous. We don't think of it that way, but it really is.
I don't know if you've seen it when you were there. We have finally metal detectors.
So I went and visited in the ER. I was in Albuquerque like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you went to the meeting. Yeah, to the ED thing.
Yeah, and I went to the ER, and when I was in the ER, when I went to the ER, I went to go in, and he goes, "Can you put your keys and your cell phones out on the table? I'm going to wand you." And I was like, what? And I had to laugh because the old director, now much higher in the organization,
I remember,
always said never doing metal detectors. What's the point? Because the reality is if you're gonna have a metal detector, then you have to have someone who can take whatever you find off that person, and and to me that means you got to have somebody with with law enforcement, someone who, like, if you're worried about taking a gun from somebody when they come in the front door, you should be someone with a gun.
But we're security now, but they're not armed. Our security,
No.
I know.
And but I just had to laugh, and I gave that leader a hard time. I said, I got metal detected when I was on the way in the door, and I just have to tell you, I don't know how many times you said we were never going to do that. And he's like, yeah, I know. Give him a hard time about it, but and I get it. And unfortunately, ERs today have to do that. I mean,
well, it's somewhat of a deterrent. A really committed person, you're not going to keep away with it. But the occasional or the not so committed, or just letting them know might keep one or two out of it. When we were in triage in the old days, right, the saying was it's not if, it's when, right? And I mean, you remember those little triage rooms? If somebody went crazy in there, you had nowhere to go.
Nowhere to go.
It was like really tight, and you were there with your scribe, and that was usually it. And hopefully, you figured out before that you might not want to have that person in there. But it was interesting. But I tell you honestly, especially now with this happened, I wasn't in the ED that long, but then with flight, I was kind of more like a first responder type. I miss it. This was really where I'm an ICU nurse too, but I was never that good at labeling every line, and I'm what a spaghetti type.
You're an ER nurse at heart, is what you're saying?
I'm an ER nurse at heart, and then in the old days that's different. Now we're always so full. In the old days, you have your ED patients who come the next day and they're gone, right?
Yep.
That's the idea. You don't see them again. That's very different than the ICU, right? Where they're like there sometimes for weeks and months.
That's true.
And the family and all that. But it's not anymore. The other day, just to give you a perspective, today we had 50 admitted patients in the ED. Last year, there was actually a day where we had 100. And we have, 82 beds and 20 hall beds? I don't know how many there are altogether. Yeah. We had an ICU admitted patients in triage. That's how bad it was. And we had actually, and the EDs just the ones that are getting hammered, right? I mean, they're all getting hammered. Don't get me wrong. There's everywhere. We have 2 beds now in the ICU room sometimes. We have 3 patients, ICU patients. So everybody's stretching, but our poor ED, dude, and what happened is, and that's something, a lot of them left, right? You look at the wall there, at the distinguished nurses, and there's maybe 1 or 2 left, right? It's all travelers.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. Mm-hmm. Now, when you made the transition from ER to flight, mm-hmm. when was the first time where you were like, oh shoot, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is a completely different world. Was it that first couple of flights or?
It was, we did a lot of pickups and stuff. So, no, it was a scene call on 550, but we're out in the middle of the road, landing on the street, right? Closing everything down. And we have a patient, a car wrecked into a tractor trailer. And the guy is like kind of breathing, but not really. So I climb in there, still with my helmet on, and want to see, do I need to intubate this guy, right? And honestly, in my first few flights, that would have been a job for the medic, right? Because they do field intubations. I ended up doing some, but that's a scary thing, right? And I was in there, and suddenly somebody tapped on my shoulder and said, "You need to get out of here." So what happened is, while I was in there looking at this patient, he wasn't upside down and barfing. I like to sometimes make it a little more dramatic, but he was in bad shape and he was caught in. And the firemen already started cutting off the roof to get him out.
Wow.
Get the other guy out. I don't completely remember, but I was not so aware of scene safety, right? That's really something I learned. In the ED, I didn't have to worry about the scene safety, right? There was like 20 people and everything was lit up, But here was like, there was a fire chief somewhere and directing traffic. And somebody, my partner actually was like, okay, you need to get out of here. This guy's cutting off the roof. So then when I realized I wasn't in Kansas anymore.
Yeah, I bet.
So that's flight was so how this works, just for people that maybe don't know flight, how it works for us. We always flew with a nurse and a medic, right? And now we actually fly quite a few doctors, fellows, right, with our ED consortium, which is very active in that. And that's really cool. It's nice to have a doctor sometimes. So the big one was actually so we flew a lot of ICU patients, right? We go down to smaller hospitals, if it's Raton or if it's Gallup or if it's, Roswell, and pick up ICU patients. Now, those are my kind of patients, right? So I feel comfortable. There's like 5 pumps running. Yeah. We run 200-hour pumps. And that was my world, right? And intubated, and we had to put the vent on and stuff. I had to learn, you learn to be an RT basically, right? Because you have to run the vent. And but as soon as it goes on the scene, as soon as there's like people running around and people flying out of pickup trucks and stuff, my medic's running the show, because they've been on the bus, they've been to these things, they know how it works with the police and the fire department and stuff. Of course, if you do it a few years, you get eventually hip to it, right? And you step up to that level. But that's really the main difference. So you and your medic make the decision. That's it. There's no doctor. You have a satellite phone that takes forever. And sometimes, but if something goes south, you better know what you're doing, right? Now, one thing that's, I think, very unique to New Mexico and to UNM, especially UNMH Lifeguard, we flew a lot of high-risk OB because a lot of the private companies don't touch OB, because that's a big lawsuit. If you kill a baby or something, that's just, that doesn't look good. And
that's a lot of paperwork.
That's a lot of paperwork, a lot of trouble, probably lawsuit. And we flew those patients, right? And especially high-risk OB was everything that didn't have prenatal care, which is a lot on the res, right? And that's really gets your attention too, when you like check one more time and there's a little foot sticking out and that stuff. In the ED, you don't have that. In the ED, the OB nurses, they just push you out of the way, right? They just come in there and take over.
You get spoiled because you have a labor and delivery right there. You're like, okay, here's your patient. There you go.
There you go. Upstairs she goes. And so I, you learn. I never had to deliver a baby in flight. I got really lucky, and then of course, just like in the ambulance, nobody ever dies on the airplane, right? So they don't die till they get declared in the ED. Remember Dr. Green? So, but that was kind of when I realized that it's different, right? And it's scary sometimes. It really is, and you see things that you didn't expect to see,
So tell me about a patient that changed the way you practice.
So, okay. And that's actually a funny question, because I read your little thing, what you said, what questions you might ask and stuff, right? And you asked 3 things you should always do, right? And if you don't mind if I already jump into that, because I actually took that to heart. And,
all right.
So the first thing is very simple. Always introduce yourself, right? Just do. And everybody's in the room. Especially in the ICU, I always felt like I'm the clutch between the machine and the person. I'm explaining what's going on there. The doctors sometimes do, but usually then you have to go and explain what the doctor just explained, right? But you say things like, you don't worry about the monitor. I worry about the monitor. You worry about your loved one, right? You look this way. That's beeping up there. That's all me. And I tell them what's going on. And, so the one thing, and then the one thing that's really important, that's actually mission critical. Always double check your meds. And when I say double check, I mean triple check and quadruple check. I know they tell you that in nursing school. Don't skip that step.
Absolutely.
Floor, if you feel like you can draw, meds for 2 or 3 patients from the Pyxis, because you think you are slick, you double check. I have a story about that where I learned that I was in Santa Fe still, right, in the ICU. Now in Santa Fe, smaller hospital, Christus, you get floated to the floor. At UNM, you usually didn't. I got floated to the floor, right? I had 5 patients. They were all little old ladies with abdominal pain. There was Mrs. Garcia, there was Mrs. Montoya, there was Mrs. Gonzalez, and they all looked the same, right? They were all these little bitty, very sweet little ladies with abdominal pain. And even their families looked all the same, right? There was the big guy, there was the cute one, there was a loud one. It was like I had to look in the room and said, I have no idea who this is. I need to look at the wristband, and then I need to go back out and make sure these medications are really just for this little old lady. Yep. So that's, you learn it the hard way in the ED. Sometimes you might even learn it by making a mistake, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the one, though, that I learned, that changed my practice, and it's a small thing, but I consider it important. I always ask if there's one more thing. Is there one thing that you want to tell me that nobody asked you? And here's how that came to be. I had a patient, a little old lady, who had vaginal bleeding, right? And the doctors came and they checked and they looked and and looked at all this and they couldn't figure out where she was bleeding from and tests and then we cleaned her up and I was like, almost on the way out, and it says, Miss, Gallegos, is there one more thing? What nobody asked, right? And she said, my hemorrhoids are really bothering me. And I was like, really, hemorrhoids? I look up, so I looked a little deeper than everybody else, a little lower, and there she is, bleeding from my hemorrhoids, right? And it's just a small thing, but I really learned, especially in the ED, right, where everything is quick and people are afraid and they're like, what's going on? I have no idea, right? And especially if you educate and they're out and they remember like one of the 10 things you tell them and stuff, right? And I really learned, I always ask, is there one more thing? And 90 times is nothing, right? But the one time you will hear something that nobody asked, that the doctors didn't catch, that the family didn't catch, and they will tell you. If you listen, patients will tell you what's going on with them. Anyway, that's the one thing I can remember off the top of my head. And then I have one more thing, though. It changed my practice, too. We were flying out to Berlin, and there's this little rough area between Berlin and Socorro. I forgot what it's called, but it's like, it's by the river. It's a farm area, but it's kind of rough. It's a meth thing. So we fly out there, gunshot wound to the head, right? And older guy, so probably self-inflicted. And we out there, and he need to be intubated, right? And there's a volunteer fire department out there, and they're doing good. And I got my first field intubation. I flew with what's her name right now? I remember in a second. Awesome nurse, It was with another nurse, not with a tech. So I did my field intubation, and I got stuck it first time, got my cords and stuff, and stuck it in there, got the tube in, and I was all happy, right? Flying back. It was not a very long flight, and then Dr. Green, and she just looked at him and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't think he's going to make it." And I felt really bad because, you know what? I was really happy that I stuck my field tube to a patient that's dead. And, I was like somewhat elated, but I should have been, So it was really strange. You had to kind of get your feelings, you have to kind of put him in perspective, I mean, yeah, he died, and I'm very sorry. But I was still happy that I got my field intubation, and, so sorry.
It's kind of a weird dichotomy of the fact that, when terrible things happen, you're like, oh my gosh, there was a 7-car pileup. This is the trauma part is like going, oh man, we were getting ready to get our butts kicked. And even though it's a sad thing, you're like going, it's not like we want the bad things to happen. We just want to be there if they do. And I think everybody feels that way. And sometimes I could see where sometimes you'd feel a little guilt about that, being like, oh gosh, is that a little morbid of me that I'm like going, this is cool. But I think that's just part of, I think everybody's got a part of that. I remember the first time we had the first time I seen a doc open up somebody's chest.
Yeah.
In the trauma room. And the guy didn't make it. The gentleman didn't make it. And they rarely do if you're opening up their chest, in the emergency department, that is. But sure enough, they opened up his chest and sure enough, he didn't make it. And then afterwards, the doctor is like, everyone was like, oh, well, let me look in there and let me see. And, there's that curiosity and part of me is kind of like, okay, that's a little weird, but also like it's a curious thing. I could see where people would be like, curious about that and wondering what's going on there.
Well, we're teaching hospital, right? There's a chance that sometimes you felt like they open the chest because they can, right? And it shows how it's done. The survival rate is very low. Top of my head, I probably remember 1 or 2 that I did well after that.
I think I've seen probably more chests open than many. I've seen it done probably 5 or 6 times, and I don't think any of them have ever survived.
I got one guy who was a motorcycle wreck, and he survived. Well, let me put it this way: he survived us, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yes. He went upstairs, but that's saying a lot. If we can get him upstairs and get him to the ICU, that's something. Because if nothing else, it gives the family a chance to see him before he passes, and before give the family a chance to say goodbye, which I think there's a lot of value in. But that's a win in my book. If you get him to survive to go up to the operating room or to the ICU, that's pretty good. But
I think one thing I remember there, I was actually in Santa Fe in the ICU. We had a car wreck, young man. He came from like Wagon Mounds, like far out there. I don't know. You remember New Mexico, right? That's way out.
Way out.
And he came to us, and he was bleeding. So every time we did chest compression, he bled everywhere, right, over the nose and other orifices. I think it was the highest amount of blood. I know other people have higher records. I think my highest was 24 units with a rapid infuser.
That's a lot.
A lot. And the whole room was just a bloody mess, right? Everything. And we just called him, and was there nothing we can do and stuff. And then I remember the door of the ICU opened, and I hear this woman screaming, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" And it's like, oh, crap. And then and so what we did, me and one other, I think it was a tech or a CNA, we just cleaned up the room. We just hid everything. We just threw everything in bags. We just wiped stuff and stuffed it in the corner and just covered him up. And so by the time the doctor knew what we were doing, it kind of took her time and wasted a little time. And then by the time she walked in, I mean, he was obviously gone, but he looked good, right? If she would have come 5 minutes earlier, it would have been like a total disaster area, Have you seen those,
We've done that many a times. I remember many a times in the emergency department, kind of doing just kind of a cursory clean, throw everything in the corner, push it in the corner, cover it up. And then one of the things that one of the nurses taught me a long time ago when I was a tech there, one of the nurses taught me to turn down the lights, and we'd take the little overhead spotlight and we'd shine it in the corner. And so it was almost like a mood lighting, but it was a little bit darker, not as harsh. And sometimes was, make it seem a little bit more peaceful than it really was.
Yeah.
Because we all know that, and there's a lot to be said for having the patients there, the family members there while we're resuscitating, and I know many ERs do that, and ours certainly did.
Yeah, we used to do that. Yeah.
Where you could bring the family in and let them see the efforts that are happening and let them see the hard work, the blood, sweat, the tears it's going into trying to save their loved one's life. That goes a really long way to make them feel a little bit better.
Yeah, we've seen it too. We had, especially with like little old patients, where the first time you do chest compression, all the ribs go and stuff, and the little extremities are flying, And you've said before, do whatever, and then they come in and see what you really do and how that looks, and quite often they will say, no, that's enough. Let me say that.
Oftentimes, and I've said that even in my current role, where I'll say, bring the family in, let them see what we're doing, and if they're going to see this and they're going to say this needs to stop. So,
I want to say something about what I feel one of our major challenges is, especially with healthcare in this country specifically. Now, I come from a different country where things are a little different.
Yeah.
I think one of the problems that America has with some of his healthcare issues, right, is it get looked at through the lens of a moral code and a moral decision. And while I understand that on an individual basis, right, when I made my decisions to get sober, that was my own morals, hopefully that saved me. However, as a country, we should look at it as a healthcare crisis, right? And I talk about a few things specifically. One is the drug addiction, right now the opioid addiction. That's a healthcare crisis. It doesn't matter so much if the individual person is weak or whatever, That's not really the issue, how we should address it. The other one is gun violence. And I'm very specific about that one. We see that a lot, right? Maybe not like Chicago or Detroit. But little Albuquerque has its own problem with gun violence, right? We see a lot of it. And most of it is drug and gang related. We know that. Very few, every once in a while, some really innocent bystander gets hit. It's the exception. We see a lot of suicides or attempted suicides. It's a public health crisis, right? It's not a weak individual and I understand I've guns myself. I'm in New Mexico. My father-in-law goes hunting and, mine are locked away and stuff and registered. But I understand the whole discussion about I don't want to take anybody's guns away. However, no, that's not true. If you're unsafe and if you can't handle it and if you have them laying around with kids, you should have been taking them away, right? But it's a public health crisis. It's not a moral crisis. They're weak or they're mentally, they're unstable and stuff, because most mentally unstable people are actually much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. The other one, of course, big one in this country is always abortion, right? It's a big thing right now. That's a public health crisis. It's not a moral. Individually, yes, it's maybe different. But European countries, which are, easily called here socialist countries, which somewhat are, they have they look at it as a public health crisis, right? They say, okay, sex education, free contraceptives, we're not going to have people stopping having sex. That's just not realistic, right? But that's the moral approach to it. Just don't do it. Yeah. And then the other thing, of course, in this country, as you see it all the time, it's just the woman has to deal with it, right? The man or the boy or whatever that was involved is gone, right? He doesn't have anything to do with it. He doesn't have to pay. He doesn't have to go in. So, but that's kind of my general thing. It should be addressed as a public health crisis and not so much on the individual basis. He has rights and all that, and everybody has their opinions, and that's good for yourself. But as a country, as a big community, these are public health crises that need to be addressed on that level. And that's just my soapbox. Sorry about that.
No, you're absolutely right. Certainly it's something, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on politically, there's issues that are political issues that affect healthcare, and it is as uncomfortable it is sometimes to talk about that, and there's going to be people on either side of the aisle, doesn't mean that doesn't need to be talked about, because it still needs to be talked about. So it's always a challenge to kind of ride that fine line of without having those conversations and opening up those discussions without necessarily saying, like we got to come to an agreement somewhere. So
Yeah, and I mean, here's the big part, right? My opinion doesn't really mean anything, right? If I like something or doesn't like something, it's not a public health discussion, right? That's, I've this discussion with my daughter, right, who has a lot of friends who are gender neutral, gender, whatever all the stuff is. I'm 60 years old, right? I'm kind of a little behind the 8 ball on all that. But here's the thing, even if I think some of the stuff is BS, that's my BS. That's my problem, not their problem. They don't have, my opinion does not mean somebody else has to change what they think about themselves, right?
Right.
And that's really how I look at it. I'm not a moral preacher and stuff. I have my own opinions, my own morals. But I want to go back one more time to our ED. So how I look at my patients, right? And where I come from nursing. My meth heads, my heroin addicts, my climb up the walls with a spit guard on it and stuff. I might not like them, but I do love them. They are my patients. They're human beings, and I will treat them that way. Now, if they're unsafe and they're threatening me, I will defend myself. But morally, I will not judge them. I mean, I don't say ever, but while they're there, they're mine, and I will take care of them as much as I can, or as much as they let me. And then when they're out there,
yeah, I mean that's what good nurses do, right? Like we're just here to take care of you. We're not here to judge you. We're not here to, that's your morals and what you do is up to you. We're going to try to take care of you while you're here and get you as good as we can get you. So
and I have a story about that too, and just how I really realized that. One of our, frequent flyers, probably somebody young guy, comes all the time. I mean, high as a kite and a big pain in the butt. Not really, really violent, but always kind of on the edge, right? And just a big pain, yells at you and complains, and then you kick him out with his bus pass and his sandwich. And on the way out, we definitely walked to the door because you never know what he's up to. He suddenly spoke to me in German.
Really?
He had like somewhere in school sometimes he learned a few words of German, and he recognized with all this crap that was going on that I have an accent, that I'm probably from there, and he talked German to me. And I looked at him and say, yeah, under all this crap is a real nice human being. There's actually somebody with a brain that recognizes what's going on. That was quite interesting, actually.
Funny story about speaking German. I don't know if you ever got a chance. Did you meet Uda that worked in the ED before? She was before your time.
No, I didn't heard of her, but never met her. She was a tech in the emergency department, and she spoke German. She was from Germany, and she amazing woman who has passed, but and a dear friend. But when we were in the emergency department one day, we had a woman who came in and she spoke German. And I remember asking that woman, I said, okay, she spoke English and German. And I said, if I was going to try to pick up a girl in German, what would I say? I was just kind of making conversation. And she goes, I got you. You would say this. So she told me this thing to say. And I practiced it a couple times with her. And she's like, you got it. So sure enough, I go over to Uda and I say this phrase in German. And Uda just looks at me like, what did you just say to me? And I go, I said this, and I said it again, thinking like, God, I am so smooth here. And I wasn't trying to pick her up. I was just, being funny. And I said it again, and she goes, who taught you that? And I said, oh, this patient. She's like, I'm going to go have a conversation with her. So she goes over and she says to this woman in German, she's like, are you trying to get this young man killed? And the woman, and she said it in German, and the woman just was like, and sure enough, I forgot what it was. It was something like somewhat offensive. That she, dirty, yeah. Dirty, yeah. And I was like, and Uda ended up becoming friends with that woman. They ended up becoming friends, and nice.
But it was like one of those. I was like, how funny is that? Like, it's just a random.
I have another German story if you have time. I don't know. Yeah. I was in Santa Fe, so I was a tech. I was CNA while I was in nursing school. I got an old man came in. He was an engineer from Los Alamos. And he was actually on the team that built the frame for Little Big Man.
Holy cow.
So not the bomb itself, but the frame that holds it in the aircraft, right, in the Enola Gay. And that was his deal. And he was like in his high 80s. He might have been 90 already. And we're talking about 2007 to 20, not quite 20 years ago, but, 15, 16 years ago. And so he said, once he found out I'm German, and of course, I was hoping that, the bomb was, of course, originally planned for Berlin, right? But unfortunately, they capitulated before that. And so we talked a little bit about it. And then he said, you know what, I had, and he was on his way out. I mean, he was definitely dying. And he said, in the 20s, in the 1920s, I learned some German in school. And I learned this poem. And he read it to me, this moment, right? Ich weiß nicht, was soll das bedeuten. And he didn't read it, he recited it, he remembered it. He was a very smart man, obviously. And 80 years later, he remembered it. And I knew it as a song. That's how I learned this poem. I knew it as a song. And we sang it together, this old man, and he spoke it. I kind of sang it. He remembered the melody, he knew it from somewhere else. It was a well-known melody. And these are the moments that you can't, I don't know. I think really our job is the only one where you have those moments, where you kind of really connect on such a human level that can't be repeated, right? You can't have that in sales. You can't have that in a bank. And it goes really deep. It touches you, right? And even 15 years later, I remember those 5 minutes of my life where we connected. Somebody that designed something to bomb the crap out of my country, right? But here we are, doing really well. And those are the things that you can't, I don't know. That's what makes I feel. And again, I wasn't even a nurse at that time. I was a tech. And sometimes you even touch people more as a tech than you do as a nurse, right?
100%. And I don't know if you know this, but before I was at UNM, before I was a nurse, I was a tech, and I was a tech there for a long time. I was at UNM for 18 years total.
Nice.
And I was there as a tech, and the tech role there was like the coolest job ever. But and certainly I have many patient care stories where, people that I will never, ever forget, and people that, maybe, you hope that you stuck with them, and you hope that they remembered you, as they went on. And certainly, we get a chance to touch lives in a pretty big way as a nurse and as a tech. And I think that's one of the really cool things about nursing. It's just that, you get to make a difference in this one moment, in this one very stressful moment in this person's life when they come to the emergency department. I think that's the thing I like about emergency nursing the most. So
it's no doubt. So I looked at the question. So I looked at the things that you said to forget, right?
Yeah,
that's much harder to come up with. And I think the big one, I wanted to say forget MedCalc, but then maybe not. So you're never going to do all the MLs.
Maybe not forget that. Yeah.
You're never going to do that, But you should understand your medications. That's definitely one thing. You want to know your meds, right? And then you deal with that was really tough with admitted patients, right? They're getting weird stuff we don't have in the Pyxis that we don't know. So cardiology or nephrology. Using stuff that I never heard of,
And you're never going to remember all that. Like I mean, even this week, I've pulled out meds. I pulled out meds that I was like, I have no idea what this med is. I've never heard of it, never seen it. Like I'm looking it up on my phone, going, I don't know what this is, and that happens every day. Like as a nurse, you're constantly learning. So
yes, absolutely. And again, I want to reiterate, if any new nurses listen to, double check your meds. And when I say double, I mean triple and quadruple. Look at it every time, and your doses too. Because we do hear the stories, right? People mix up, 10 times.
All the time.
And that does happen. And it happened to me. I didn't administer it because I did triple check. I was like, holy crap. Oh my God. What am I doing?
Yeah. So, this would have been really bad if I would have given this.
That would have been really bad. Yeah. And so it does happen. That's why you check. You don't check because you're already cool and you know it, right? You check because you're stressed and you have 5 patients and there's a new 3 patients in there, the other 3 left and you have no idea and you're screaming and yelling and
your brain can just fall right out. That's for sure.
Right out. Yeah. So write it down. And the other thing I think that's really even more important, when you come in and you know that, and we all know that, you have to leave the petty grudges out of there. You can't have them. And not just the stuff that just pissed you off when you drove in, right? But even the stuff with your own people, with your own staff, right? Because you do have people that you don't like. There are people that don't like you, and you work through it. But if you maintain it, if you hammer on it, it will hurt you eventually, and it will hurt your patient eventually. I do believe that.
Agreed.
So just suck it up, be a big boy, big girl.
Yep. I tell people all the time. It's not personal. Like they don't know you. They don't know you.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know your mom. They don't know they don't know anything about you.
They might say wait for you in the parking lot.
No, I've heard that a few times. Oh,
yeah. It's a lot scarier for the little 4.9 woman, than take security out there, make sure somebody comes with you.
Yeah.
Or really pissed off tech that are already medic that's already,
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, those threats, you should pass them on. You should tell somebody, right? This person threatened me, because if something happened, they want to have an idea. And we have people, we have people running out and jumping off the garage. I mean, we had some crazy stuff happening in that place, man. Yep. People are people, dude. Yep. I don't necessarily like people, but I do love them.
I understand that. So this has been a lot of fun. Torsten, I'm so glad we did this. This has been great. So
thank you. Yes, that's been fun.
Thanks for listening to the Art of Emergency Nursing podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Facebook.